back to another episode of Sit and Spin with me, your host, Joe Royal. And today on the show, back to some newer rock and roll, definitely from a group that's keeping the spirit of rock and roll alive. Young up-and-coming band, more up-and-coming here than their native country, but out with a fine new record, which would be their sophomore release, and that's from Catfish and The Bottlemen and their new album, The Ride. This actually came out back at the end of May, but I'm just getting around to talking to it now because I kind of held off and picking it up, but I was very intrigued when I saw this album come out. I'd never heard of the band before. I thought that's a really interesting name for a band. I wonder what the hell they sound like. And then you've got this illustration of a crocodile on the cover, but that'll pay off in a minute when I get to that. But I said, I gotta check these guys out and see what they sound like. And so I did. I went on the old YouTube and watched a few of their videos and listened to a few of their songs and really dug what I was hearing. The group hails from, they're an English indie rock band. They hail from England. Their band was formed originally in Wales, comprised of Ryan Evan Van McCann on lead vocals and guitar, Benjamin Benji Blakeway on bass, Robert Sideshow Bob Hall on drums, and Johnny Bondi Bon on lead guitar. Everyone's got a nickname, but it's cool. They derived their name from Van McCann's first childhood musical memory, and it was at a time he was briefly living in Australia when he was young, and he saw this street busker in Sydney playing beer bottles strung together on a wire who went by the name Catfish the Bottle Man. He liked that name, saved it, and used it for this band. And those two guys actually were reunited last year in Sydney at the seminal Australian radio station Triple J when the band were on a tour down there, which is pretty cool. But the band got their start in 2007 when originally guitarist Billy Bibby was teaching Van and Benji how to play guitar. He started jamming with them, Benji started playing bass, and they hooked up with the original drummer by the name of John Barr, who stayed with them into 2010, and then he left and was replaced by current drummer Robert Hall. They started playing their initial shows at the parking lots of the gigs of other artists from UK groups like Kasabian, and they released 3 singles on the Communion Records label in 2013 that all did pretty well. That got them picked up by Island Records in the UK the following year, releasing their debut album The Balcony in June of 2014. But it didn't come out here until January 2015. But in their native country, they actually have done pretty well. That album debuted in the top 10, won them the BBC Introducing Award in 2014, which would be kind of like the best new artist here in the Grammys. But in the midst of all that, Billy Bibby just unexpectedly left the band, just felt like, I want to do something else. And he was replaced then by Johnny Bondi Bon. And while I said there's still kind of an upcoming, somewhat unknown entity here in their native country, when Ride came out, it debuted at number 1. It done pretty well there. It went to number 6 in Australia as well, number 7 in Ireland, came in at respectable 28 here. But I'm glad. Hopefully they'll get a lot more notice. The band's sound is similar to some other UK bands, groups like the Cribs, a little bit of Feeder, the Arctic Monkeys, the Kooks, groups like that, and they don't overly reveal that they're British sounding. They don't kind of betray that, except in some of the song titles, songs like Glasgow and Heathrow, which obviously you know that they're talking about places in the UK, and also a little bit in the lyrics in the song Soundcheck, which was the album's first single. One of my favorites is probably going to be the song I used to spotlight the record on the show when I'm talking about it. Super catchy, some really cool guitar parts in that, but in that song, Van McCann uses this line, meet you on your fag break, which of course would be cigarette break here, but if you know British slang, you know the difference between the two. But the group that they kind of remind me of the most, actually, is an American band, Spoon. I hear a lot of similar elements in the mix of acoustic and electric guitars, perhaps not quite as angular as Spoon can get, but there's definitely a little bit of, I can hear a little bit of Britt Daniels' vocal stylings and Van McCann's vocal stylings, so Spoon brought to mind a lot. But that's a good thing. I love Spoon, so that's cool. But otherwise, you know, it's just really good guitar-driven indie rock. The album opens on the track you just heard, 7, which kind of fades up on that steady bass and drum thing and then just layers on top of it. It was the record's second single and definitely one of my favorites on the album. Track you're hearing now, Twice. It's the 4th single on the album. It's also really good. That's followed by Soundcheck, which we've already talked about. And overall, the album kind of rides a similar sort of beat for most of the record, with a couple of acoustic exceptions. Glasgow, which is the album's 3rd single, a great tune, kind of like a happier kind of sounding song, but wouldn't get airplay here probably because they dropped the word shit a couple of times. There's a couple of P, as you noticed, a little parental advisory. ridiculous. And also the song Heathrow, which is kind of more of a sullen acoustic ballad with shades of Noel Gallagher and Oasis in there. I could definitely see those guys covering that song and being proud of it, wishing they had written it themselves. But again, bands I like, so it's all cool. But otherwise, the record still kind of stays on the more upbeat rockin' vibe. Songs like Oxygen, which has an almost southwestern stomping feel to it. And when I say that, it's because the band I heard in my head when they were doing that is the old 97s, if you're familiar with them at all. It just sounded like something the old 97s would do, but if a British band, if the old 97s were British instead, it would be this. But great tune nonetheless. And there's just other great songs like that on the album. And then the record closes out on its longest track, a song called Outside, which takes the album out almost the same way it came in. It's just kind of a quiet build, a layering of the instruments, building more and more to a full rock sound, and then these kind of quiet, loud, quiet passages. And then just as the song feels like it's building to this final lift and this crescendo with these guitar solos coming in, it just abruptly ends. And it feels almost like it's a mistake at first, and then you realize that a lot of modern movies kind of just end that way. It's like, yeah, ending, here it is. So it's kind of cool in that regard. But otherwise, really, really dig it. Solid sophomore outing from Catfish and the Bottlemen. And again, like, if you've never heard of these guys either, you like all those bands I've mentioned, something you definitely want to check out because it's a great rocking album. Catfish and the Bottlemen, The Ride. It's out now. Go pick it up. And that's the show for this week. We'll catch you next time on Sit and Spin. Catch you then. See you later. And go out and check this album out. Catfish and the Bottlemen, The Ride. A group definitely keeping the spirit of rock and roll alive with their sophomore record, and that would be the new record from Catfish